everybody to this new next session of Numeracy for Life, and we're very pleased to welcome Rishi Sunak and his team from the Richmond Project, who are campaigning for maths and numeracy education. So very closely aligned to what we're also looking into. So thank you very much. All three of you do feel free to come in on answers, but don't get too overly voluble in your answers, so we can get through the questions that we have put, and you've seen the questions, and there'll be some free form. So just to open the batting, Rishi, would you just like to tell us a little about the Richmond Project and what drove you to set it up and your key objectives?
Well, firstly, Chair, thank you so much for having us today and inviting the Richmond Project team, and thank you to the committee for your focus on this issue. Obviously, we're passionate about it, but a committee with your weight and standing, focusing on the issue, publishing findings, I think will do wonders for the debate and raising awareness. So I appreciate the effort and time that you've shown. Well, my wife Akshita and I started the Richmond Project last year, a charity whose mission is to improve social mobility through education, and specifically via numeracy. And we did that because we believe if people have more skill and confidence with numbers, then that will open doors for them at school, at home, at work, and in their general lives. And in doing that, ultimately, hopefully be able to transform people's lives. The first piece of work we did last year was a very deep research project into the country's attitudes and attainment with numeracy. I think the largest study of its kind, which we did with King's University and Public First, and it showed actually, quite in heartened fashion, the vast majority, 90% of the country, think that this is really important and actually would like to improve as well. But it also highlighted that there is a challenge. 40% of the country doesn't have strong numeracy, so there is a need for attention and focus on this issue, and the evidence in the research is clear that this can make a difference. People with poor numeracy end up earning less, much less likely to be in employment, and actually it turns out that if you look at very young children, perhaps the best indicator of their future socioeconomic status is their attainment in numeracy. So for all these reasons, this is something that I think is worth focusing on. Our plan at the Richmond Project, and Lizzie and Bodil, you'll hear from later, a brilliant team, is not just to conduct research to help us understand what's happening, but then to partner with, support, or indeed initiate projects and ideas that we think can make a meaningful difference and hopefully over time scale to have national impact. And we welcome the opportunity to talk about our work to date and what we plan to do in the future.
Great, thank you very much. Well, Lady Garden's going to open.
Indeed. So thank you very much for being with us. What do you see as the impacts of low numeracy levels on individuals, on the economy, and on society as a whole?
Did you want to kick off on them?
As you mentioned, I think the impacts of low numeracy are felt right across the spectrum, and that's to do with the individual who can't access the future that they want because they're prevented from accessing opportunities, right the way through to sort of stagnating growth for the economy and for society. I also think it's really important to say up front how emotional this topic is for people in the UK. That has come through loud and clear in our research, and it's also important. I think respondents in our research were only more anxious about public speaking than they were about maths.
Oh, yes.
Which, when we know, possibly not for this group, but public speaking for most people is an extremely frightening, a debilitating fear, really. That speaks a lot to how people perceive numbers. And I think that lack of confidence actually impacts how people perform. They feel overwhelmed. They feel like they don't want to seek help. And there's a sort of normalization of avoiding maths. So for individuals coming to them first, outside of the emotional aspect, there is really concrete value to strong numeracy. I know you had Sarah from Get Further here in one of your previous sessions. Get Further have found that there's earnings uplift of over £70,000 when someone achieves a pass at maths GCSE versus when they don't. But that number is even higher than the equivalent number for achieving a pass in English. And so it's clearly vital that we help more people access that life-changing qualification. And then beyond that, we've also done some research into people's financial literacy. Our research very clearly, obviously, illuminates that link between core numeracy, maths in the classroom, and financial literacy in adulthood, and that's really about people being in control of their finances, which in turn is about them being in control of their lives. So there are very, very profound consequences for individuals throughout our society in terms of low numeracy. And then for the economy, I know you're speaking to National Numeracy later today, and they're here. Their research has found that the cost to our economy as a whole of our situation, the low numeracy today in the UK, it's over £20 billion a year, which is over 1% of GDP. Also, I would just want to say on the society point to your question, there is this very troubling, very clear intergenerational pattern of low numeracy where, and this is particularly pronounced in mothers, we could talk about that later, but where parents generally in the home, their confidence and competence with numbers is observed and then absorbed by their children. And there is actually evidence that if you grow up with a family who are less confident about numbers, you will perform less well in schools. That is a very difficult pattern to break, but a very important one.
But it still seems more socially acceptable to be bad at maths than to be bad at English, for instance, doesn't it?
Yes, I think you've heard that from many of your other panellists, and we'd agree. And it speaks to, as Lizzie said, part of what we're trying to do at the Richmond Project is change the culture around numbers in our country. Now, let's be clear, it's a very ambitious thing to do, but having had the experience in government and out, it feels to me that actually government can do many things and it can implement many policies, but culture change is something that all of us in all of our different ways have to contribute to. And we'd love to look forward to a world where nobody feels either the need or the necessity to say that they're not a numbers person, that maths isn't for them, because our fervent belief is actually that everyone with the right support and encouragement can be more confident and skillful with numbers, and in doing so live a more fulfilling life. And that's, as I said, hopefully the work of many years, but something that we can all work towards. And I would say on that, actually encouragingly, when you bring that up with people in the media or positions of responsibility, they're very receptive to the idea that they find themselves or others saying it and recognise that it's not a good thing, and particularly, as Lizzie said, because children pick up on what their parents or adult carers say and do. And it's not good if children at a very young age are seeing that some people are good at numbers and some people aren't, and numbers are something to have anxiety about. And that's why breaking this intergenerational pattern and that positive language, positive experiences with numbers, starting very early, I think is critical.
Thank you.
Good. Lord Hampton.
My question's just been asked, actually, I think. Possibly, can we I was going to talk about the fact that it is normalised and it's perfectly acceptable to say you're not a good at maths, but you talked about the intergenerational low numeracy. Maybe could you talk a bit further about how we stop that, because adults, as we found, are really difficult to get back into education if they've had a bad experience at school. So how do we deal so that the adults become the ambassadors?
I think Lizzie will talk a little bit about our broader approach, but I think Bodil could also helpfully add something, because we've been thinking about this and actually ended up supporting a programme called Learning with Parents that looks at engaging parents with their children at an early age. But I mean, Lizzie, do you want to give our overall sense on Bodil and talk a little bit about that?
I think absolutely right, and that's why so far as a charity we are deliberately working across both early years, some interventions around school and even into adulthood. Just to sort of give some context to the numbers, so we found that in particular low-income mothers are those who struggle most with both number confidence and number competence. So in our research we literally tested the maths as well as the attitude to the numbers. But hearteningly, coming back to kind of Rishi's overall opening comment on appetite for change, they are also disproportionately more likely to want to seek help with that skill. So I do think we're pushing against an open door to some extent. We can talk about adult numeracy programs specifically, because I think that is one of the toughest nuts to crack. But briefly on our approach to family maths, Bodil can go into Learning with Parents in a second, but we very much see this as part of the culture change piece. I think it is all about meeting parents where they are, not giving them, and we hear this a lot, anything else that makes them feel like they've let themselves down, their child down, like they have an endless list of tasks that they need to work through in order to stay afloat as parents. We know that parents feel stretched, they feel busy, and we want to make it feel the opposite of any of those things, emotional and scary. We want to make it fun, enjoyable, a moment of connection with the children. There's actually really good research that backs this up. So Stanford Dream has found that with all those early number concepts, learning through play is genuinely effective. The EEF has also found that parental engagement adds at least 5 months of progress to a child. So it's not fluffy just because it's fun. It's actually credible. In terms of our own work, we started an initiative called Books Count at the beginning of this year. And as a team, we talked about the solution, the equivalent of reading your child a story at night, which most of us know that we want to do, we want to aspire to do, and it feels like a lovely activity to do together. Turns out the numeracy equivalent in some ways is in fact to still do that, but to find in those much loved stories number concepts, counting, shapes, pattern recognition and so on, and practice those gently with your child in a low stakes accessible way. So that's an example of the sort of initiative we think can really help families, something that takes their own daily routine and helps layer in numeracy very gently, rather than making people feel like they need to fundamentally change the way that they talk about numbers with their child. It's more about incremental progress. But that, Bodil, say something about learning with parents.
Just on that, I'm presuming that that's something parents should start when the child is 2, 3, 4 years old, or very early.
If not earlier, honestly, I think.
Yes.
So the story, the story that we used to launch Books Count. I'm hoping this is a familiar book, but we took The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which is a very simple, usually the child has it as a board book, so very, very early reading. And we said, most people do not look at this book and think this is a maths book, and that is ideal. We don't want them to think that. We want them to think this is a lovely story to enjoy together, and then gently with the child you can introduce, this is what one apple looks like. I'm now struggling to recall all the fruit. It ends with 5 oranges, but you're counting up.
Feet.
Exactly, and I think it's that example. So a story you might read to a child even younger than 2, and just very gently introducing those concepts. And what's heartening in terms of that initiative is the response we've had from what I would call the sort of literacy community. So both literacy charities with whom we have partnered, but also publishers who we talk to. Everybody is aligned that building these habits early is great for children, whether it's about their reading for pleasure or their numeracy. So it's been really great to see that positive reception.
Yeah, so absolutely, under 5, there's still so much that we can do, and it's so important that parents understand that it's not about... I heard about a nursery who sent 3-year-olds home with a worksheet of 3 + 7, 2 + 4. That's completely inappropriate, and that's not what we're asking under 5s to do at all. And it's things that are so traditional, like snakes and ladders, brilliant for doing what's called subitizing, which is noticing 5 dots and knowing that it's 5 without counting. But too often now we're shifting away from playing snakes and ladders with our children, actually sometimes in a very well-meaning way, to I'm going to give them an app on a screen which says that it's going to develop my child's numeracy. It says that it's going to teach them all these things. But much more traditional activities like blocks, which are introducing some spatial reasoning skills, all those kind of activities are fantastic for under 5s. And then when we go through primary school, what we find is that parents see worksheets coming home with maths homework and say, I don't know how to help my child with this, or when I do try to help, my child says that's not how we do it anymore. We don't do subtraction with a column subtraction anymore. We do it with a jumping frog on a number line. And then the child says, I don't want your help. And they go into school and they say, my mum told me to do it wrong and now I got in trouble. So there's something here, I think, that's a lesson for parents, but also for schools. If you want parental engagement, which I think they do, you need to think carefully about how you're approaching homework with your children. And whether it's a session that they do for parents to say, here are the new methods, here is how you can support them. And you know what, if the child does come in with column subtraction and they got the answer right, can you at least celebrate that the homework is done, they got the answer right and their parents supported, because those are wins even if we didn't get the jumping frog. So there's something about that. But what I really love about Learning with Parents, which is one of the projects that we've supported, is they talk about 3 categories of ways that parents can support through primary school, right up to age 11, and those are talk, play, and exploration. So, for example, if you are doing kilometres and metres in your maths lesson, you're converting between the two, over dinner that day, can you have a conversation about how long is our journey to school? Is it more or less than a kilometre? The parent might need to look up quickly, how does that convert from miles? What's the longest journey that we've ever been on? How, you know, whether that's a caravan trip up north or whether that's across the Atlantic, you can still have that conversation. That's not something you need to do with a 2-year-old. That's a really valuable conversation you can have over dinner with your 10-year-old. Exploration, going out into the local area and saying, you know, odds and evens, we can spot those going down the street. And it's normalising these aspects of numeracy and maths in our everyday lives, which means that they go beyond a maths lesson and beyond something that's put in a box to something that we just see as part of our everyday.
And just to add to Bodil's point, these things all come together, because if you're able to engage parents in their children's learning in the way that Bodil described, you're doing a bunch of things. You're helping the children's development with foundational numeracy at a critical stage in their development, tick. You're dealing with this intergenerational issue at the same time, because you're showing the parents that they don't need to be anxious about this, that there actually is a fun and accessible way for them to do this with their children. And that's why we love this intervention, because you're doing something good for the parents and changing the culture around adults and how they think about numbers at the same time as giving the children the developmental benefit that they need. And the combination of those things, I think, will, and again, it's in a small way, will over time change the culture around this. So which is why we particularly like these early years interventions that engage parents in the activity or in the conversation, because they have this extra benefit.
Yeah, can I just... Oh, sorry, do you want to go?
No, that's
Just check for the record whether when you talk about parents, you include grandparents.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone with parental responsibility, anyone who's spending that time with children, you know, childminders who are doing after-school care, for example, those are also really important stakeholders. And these are where those kind of messages of, I can't do maths, you know, maths isn't for girls, you know, I'm an English person, those are the spaces that these can really start to emerge. And if we can pick up on those, say, you know how to do snakes and ladders, you know, we can do this, that can really make a difference.
Do you want to come in, Lady Bull? No.
Well, I could come in. I mean, I'm conscious we've strayed a lot onto early years. I'm happy to come in now because my question is really to Mr. Sunak, and it does wrap up. So you've talked about the need for culture change. You've talked about some initiatives for changing how we live. What I'm keen to ask you, if I may, as somebody who understands the levers of power, we seem to have a policy mindset that puts literacy first. So we have a year of reading, we fund libraries, we have books for babies, we do all sorts of things. What could we do in policy terms to have a sort of must-have regard to mindset for numeracy alongside literacy? Is it about changing our libraries to be centres for words and numbers, for instance? As I'm keen to know, as somebody who's had his hands on the levers.
It's an excellent question and one that we've reflected on a lot. And you're right, literacy charities receive obviously enormously more funding than numeracy charities, more literacy volunteers, but the worst thing that we could do is make this an either or some type of competition, and we're very reluctant to do that, and which is why actually, as Lizzie spoke about books count, it was a way that you could bring these two worlds together. Right? We're in a year of reading, everyone's focused on reading for pleasure, but actually if we're just a little bit careful or deliberate with the books that we're putting in front of the kids, actually we can achieve some great numeracy outcomes as well. So look, what are my reflections? I think one is, and Bodil could talk about this, the government has levers over curriculum, and actually we should take a moment to reflect that the progress and the PISA scores and everything else over the past 10 years or so has actually been very positive. Right? Obviously there's still work to do, but we have made progress in all these areas, and the education reforms and have helped with that. The times table test has been a big success. So, where is the incremental areas that one might look at there? Because only government really can do that. There's two, I think, that spring to mind. One, the government is doing and deserves recognition and credit for that, which is the financial literacy addition to the curriculum. That they have made a priority, and we're delighted to be working with the Department for Education about testing the right curriculum, how to deliver it to support teachers to deliver it, what should be in it. We should save that for a separate question. So that's one area that obviously government has to do. And the other area is this early years. And I think we're kind of struck. We asked ourselves the exam question. We know phonics has been a huge success. Many of you have been engaged in your other lives and your school trusts and seeing the success that phonics has brought for literacy. So we set ourselves the exam question, well, what's the phonics for maths? Yeah. And we think we have an early potential answer, which is a team that we have supported called Rethink Maths, which I'll get Bodil to elaborate on. And they are developing a specific structured approach to teaching the early years foundations of numeracy to replicate the strength of the phonics curriculum and the method of teaching. Now we've supported them. We will roll that out and evaluate it, and if that ends up being very powerful, you can imagine similarly government would then have to pick up the mantle and roll that out. So I think those are probably the two particular initiatives in the school curriculum. And then the other thing that I will save, because I don't want to tread on anyone's toes, but I think we will probably end up talking a little bit about adult education, and we have some thoughts there, because I think actually we've uncovered some policy anomalies that I don't think are deliberate in the way that we fund adult education, and actually in a way that may be hindering the uptake of potential programs. And so we can get into that at the appropriate moment, but that's probably the other specific policy area that I would point to. And then last thing I'd say is that government always has a bully pulpit, right? And when I said I wanted to make numeracy a priority, maths to 18, and people will all have their views on that, but government can actually just put some things on the agenda, and it has that ability, and that is also up to the people in charge and what they choose to prioritise. They can't prioritise everything. There's lots of things that are important, but that's always an option. I don't know if I'm missing anything.
Just what I'm hearing is that interventions before you capture children in school are the hardest for policymakers. Is that right?
I think that is always the case, and I in my ministerial life was responsible for sitting on a group that tried to bring all the different departments together to focus on the early years. Andrea Leadsom was very involved in that work and has spoken about this a lot. And it is tricky because partly the Department for Health has some interventions, local government has some interventions, Department for Education has some interventions, etc. Trying to pull that all together is not easy, and there are fewer touch points. That said, there are things that outside bodies can do. I'd also say government can't do everything, and we can't expect government to do everything. So whether it's organisations like ours or ones that we can support, can probably more nimbly at a grassroots level make a difference there, and government should focus on doing the big national interventions that it can do.
Thank you.
Lord Blackwell.
Just to continue on the schools theme, we know a lot of adults, I think half of adults have arithmetic ability equivalent to an 11-year-old, so they've clearly been failed somewhere along the route. Would you like to talk a bit more about what you think could be done at schools, the Rethink programme, the phonics that
yes,
about?
Thanks. Well, and the reason I don't know if you have everyone's background, but Bodhi, you should tell them a little bit about your background, which is why we defer to you on all topics related to schools.
I feel very strongly about this. I was the founding head of maths at Michaela, which has had year groups where every single child has achieved a 4 in GCSE maths, including children who came to us with an EHCP, a statement of special educational needs, one who couldn't count to 10. So it is possible to make more progress than you can possibly imagine between that year 7 and year 11. It's also the case that secondary schools shouldn't necessarily have to. But what we know is that from 5 to 16, children likely have 2,000 hours of maths education. That is a huge, huge number. And my frustration is then when we look at the foundation GCSE paper at 16 and we say, X% of people at 16 are failing this, let's make that exam easier. I don't think for your own children, for your own grandchildren, you would think that was acceptable. If you look through a foundation GCSE maths paper, the vast majority of it is actually numeracy, arithmetic, proportional reasoning, by which I mean you've got a triangle which doubles in size here. What's going to happen to this square if you also double it? That is actually extremely practical for our day-to-day life. Of course, there are some questions at the end which go into algebra, some expanding brackets and things, which is appropriate if you're talking about children who are taking the foundation GCSE and aiming for that 5, that strong pass. But I don't think we should be playing around too much with the GCSE exam curriculum. What's really the problem is that we have 16-year-olds who come to that exam paper, and too many of them can't access, let's say, the first 2/3 of that foundation GCSE paper, despite the many, many hours of teaching that they've had. For me, one of the interventions that I think was most powerful that I saw as a teacher was when the multiplication tables check was introduced in year 4. The emphasis, the understanding that those times table skills were so foundational for everything that came beyond it really was understood, because there was that degree of accountability for that skill. Those kind of gates, which are actually on an extremely defined part of the curriculum, we're not saying let's test everything in lots of disparate contexts so that the teachers don't know where to focus, is extremely powerful. I know that the government are talking about potentially doing something similar for Key Stage 1, and if we can get that right, so that's the right gate, so that teachers really understand this is what we need to focus on for 6 and 7-year-olds, so that we know that they're numerate, that could be really powerful. So for me, that's something like those addition skills to complement those multiplication skills. The children that are predominantly failing Maths GCSE, by which I mean getting a 1 to 3, are often still counting on their fingers at 16. Something has gone wrong there. And absolutely, you've got teachers who are throwing everything at the wall when those are 15, 16-year-olds. It's extremely high stakes for the school to get those children through. But really, we need to be going further downstream and looking earlier and earlier, so that we can get as many through in a keep-up way, keeping them up to date with where they should be in the curriculum. But then we can really target the children that will not, get that pass mark in those gateways, and target the interventions then to get those children to catch up.
Do you want to spend a second on that rethink maths, just for Lord Blair's question?
So rethink maths
potentially
is all about saying, okay, we have the phonics screening check in Key Stage 1, and that's so powerful for lots of reasons. It's not just the fact that it's phonics as a topic area; it's the fact that it is short daily practice, or more or less daily practice, 10-15 minutes of whole class. Termly assessment, so your child does a 5-minute assessment at the end of each term. It's not high stakes, they don't worry about it, but it allows you to triage the children into, these children need more support next term. These children are on track. And so you can target, okay, the TA, the teaching assistant, is going to spend more time with these children. And Rethink Maths is applying a similar philosophy for everything from 3 and 4-year-olds in nursery classes through to year 1 with a year 2 catch-up year. So very similar to the timescales in which you would do a phonics scheme. And this little and often daily practice, people say, oh my goodness, I can't believe you're going to sit 4-year-olds down and teach them stuff. They love it. It's really interactive. There's lots of call and response, and they can see themselves getting better. And that gives us a really solid foundation then for these 6 and 7-year-olds to go on. We talk in reading about you learn to read so that then you can read to learn. And the equivalent in maths, you learn those math skills, you get that done so that you can use these math skills you can apply them to problems. You can do mathematics rather than just arithmetic. And if we can apply that philosophy to numeracy and to maths, I think we'll be well on our way to seeing some real changes.
And just to Baroness Ball's point, this is a great example of what organisations that are not government can do. And we set ourselves that intellectual essay question: what does phonics for maths look like? The team went out, we spoke to lots of people, we came across a brilliant set of educators who have come from that world. Similarly, were focused around this area, and we were able to fund them to go away, develop this curriculum, and get it, and we will again fund it to be trialled and evaluated in a couple of hundred different schools and early years settings. Now, that we can move far faster than government can, at which point, though, we do have to be able to hand over to government and say, look, we think this works, but ultimately it will require government to make a decision to do something nationally. Just before we leave the early years and school bit, Lord Blackwell, maybe Lizzie can just say a few words going even earlier than that about what should we expect children to be able to do by the time they get to school in the first place, which I know you've had a couple of other comments on from previous panellists, but Lizzie, maybe a second on that, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I think it's just really to underscore how much we agree with the recommendation to integrate numeracy into school readiness. So pulling together that early year and schools piece in one place. I know that David Thomas and perhaps others have said, it is an issue that the guidance today does not say anything about counting. And he doesn't mean specifically counting. It's a proxy also for saying anything else about numeracy. We know that counting to 10 is a really important piece of the sort of hierarchy of maths learning. And if you are a reception teacher and children come in, and I think the stat is some 36% of children come in not able to count to 10 in reception year, you've really got your work cut out for you to get them to where they need to be, even by the end of that first year. And so being able to put something concrete in school guidance, school readiness guidance, that's saying that that's an important skill to build is really key. And I think in an ideal world, it would be, with the deep understanding of number that sits behind being able to count to 10. What does it really mean to grow a number of things from 1 to 10? But importantly, even being able to understand the order of the numbers and how they come is still a really important building block. So something that's succinct and clear would be very helpful to parents and educators alike.
Just one quick follow-up, if I may. Clearly the ambition to get every young child familiar with numbers through the kind of programs you've talked about would be terrific. But when you say you wouldn't water down the GCSE, which again, for the best able children is clearly an important benchmark. Is there a case, as has been put to us by some people, that there will be some children who are slower at numeracy and will take longer, and the curriculum leaves them behind as it moves on to algebra and geometry, etc. Is there a case for having a parallel numeracy qualification that employers could see at least people have got the numeracy skills without requiring GCSE?
So I find this very interesting. People have put to you the idea that you could have the equivalent of an English language and English literature GCSE, but for, let's say, numeracy and maths, where maths would be geometry, your more abstract, your more difficult algebra. English language is taken by the whole gamut of students. And actually, you require that differentiation then in an English language paper between a grade 9 and a grade 8. So I think that actually makes it worse for those children who are struggling the most, because we would have to turn, let's say we were replacing foundation and higher with a numeracy and a GCSE maths. The numeracy paper would have to be sufficiently challenging to be able to discriminate between a grade 9 and a grade 8. I don't think that works for maths, because maths is so intrinsically hierarchical. There are two distinct domains in the English analogy of language, linguistics, etc., and literature, books, poetry, etc. That's not there isn't really an equivalent for that in maths. When we're talking about these numerical skills, they are the foundation of every direction in which you can take maths. They're the foundation of the geometry, they're the foundation of the financial literacy, if you want to take it in a more practical direction. I think it would be really hard to serve the children that struggle the most with a numeracy GCSE that spanned that whole grade range from grade 9 to grade 1.
Okay, I'm conscious the chair's looking at us, so we'll keep our answers shorter. And I know we're going to move on to adults. I think, Lord Blackwell, when we get on to talking about adult education and how best to take adults, we've thought a lot about this, I've thought a lot about it. As Bodil said, I think it is the right thing to encourage and support everyone to try and get that GCSE, and we should come on to what do we do with those children who then don't quite get it. And obviously the government has put forward options for different qualifications after that, and I think we have views on that, and we should get into that in our broader conversation and on how do we support adults. But I think our base case is that given that the foundation GCSE largely is core numerical skills, and you can pass by knowing those, that's the right thing to try and aim to support people to do, and then we should have an open conversation about what do we do thereafter with those that don't quite get there.
Thank you.
Lord Massey.
Thank you, thank you. Moving on to adult education, as you mentioned, much of the evidence that we've heard points to a major gap in adult numeracy, especially after the end of the Multiply programme. Do we need a coordinated strategy for adult numeracy, and can we have your reflections on Multiply after its published evaluation, which we all received, I think, a couple of sessions ago?
I can spend a moment on Multiply, and then Lizzie and Bodil could give you our broader thoughts on how best to support adults, which I think we will probably separate into how do we support young adults, i.e. those children who have just missed out on the GCSE, because I think we have a specific set of views on that, and then more broadly the adult population. When I initiated Multiply as Chancellor, it was because, as we've all been discussing, I think numeracy is important and foundational and would be good for those individuals as well as society, the economy and the country at large. I was encouraged by what I read in the evaluation report, what Multiply seemed to do successfully, and obviously I wasn't involved in the intimate detail of delivering the programme, but it did seem to do a very good job of widening and broadening participation in adult numeracy programmes. I mean, it's significantly increasing the number of adults from a wide variety of backgrounds that then engaged with the programme who otherwise would not have. In that sense, it was hugely additive, and I think that's something that you always want to make sure that the policy you're doing is additive rather than duplicative or replacing other things. So that was a success, and the completion rates were very positive, and then adults went on to further courses and study, which again is positive. I was actually quite struck. I think it was something like, the calculation was 85% of people on these Multiply courses would otherwise not have done a numeracy-oriented adult education course. So it's pretty striking, and it covered almost 250,000 people. And I think that the completion rate was 97-ish%. Again, very positive for programs like this. I think reflections and if one was looking at doing something like this in the future, which obviously I would be supportive of, I think that there is this open question as to whether there should be some type of accreditation, and that this program should be focused on giving people something that they can walk away with, which also would mean the program itself could be measured as well and evaluated from that perspective. And again, that I think there's a strong case for that. I know they debated it apparently at the time of the program and felt that it would harm participation, but I think that is a sensible thing to look at. And then the other reflection hearing from everyone was those involved in delivering it, those involved in benefiting from it, all thought it was excellent and good, but they all said there should have been greater national visibility and awareness of the programme, and at this point before, about a more coordinated effort for everyone to know this programme's important, this topic is important, slightly distinct from the general skills messaging that government puts out, that this is foundational, whether it's job centres, central government, everyone saying a bit more about this. That seemed to be quite a strong message that came across from everyone. So those are some kind of reflections on Multiply, as I said. And then when it comes to adults, I do think it's worth differentiating between, picking up from your question, what do we do with those children who have missed out on a GCSE, and then separately, how do we help adults in general, both more foundationally, but also specifically with financial literacy. I don't know, I think Bodil and Lizzie could take either of those. Which one, either of you do one of those, because I think that gives you the full picture.
Yeah, I'll do the finance lead.
Yeah. So 16 to 19, the GCSE reset policy, I think is very important for those children that have got, let's say, a 3 and they've just missed out, they're nearly there. Let's give them another chance to get that piece of paper, which can be absolutely life-changing for them. I'm very curious to see what the stepping stone qualification will be for the children who got 1s and 2s. What I will say is that we have been spoken to lots of colleges, lots of learners over the past 6 months, and the functional skills qualification, which I think is often meant to be this alternative, has lots of problems. And I would say that stems from the fact that to make it functional with lots of different contexts and to make it fair to learners who, let's say you're doing welding and you know the world of welding very well, you wouldn't need paragraphs to explain that context, but all the other learners who are also taking this qualification would. It's very, very hard to do that in a way that's not extremely wordy and often quite niche topics that you're trying to do, and the maths kind of gets lost in that, right? It becomes a test of, do you understand this context and do you have the literacy ability, rather than the functional skills maths focus that it's intended to be. There are definite advantages, and there are reasons why people take that qualification. For example, Sarah Waite saying it works well for NEETs who would otherwise not be coming into college. They're not going to wait until June to sit their test. Let's get them to do it in a much more flexible way. But I would say that is the inherent challenge of something that's as broad as functional skills, that you can't say, it needs to be fair, it needs to apply in lots of different contexts. It's really hard to do that well.
Which is the last thing on that is, there is something incredibly foundational about having GCSE maths. I think and when we think about alternative qualifications, the challenge you always have is, will they be valued by employers? Right? Obviously, they can help people in their day-to-day lives if they get these skills, but ultimately, if they're going to translate to better employment outcomes and earnings outcomes, you need to make sure employers understand them and value them. And I would say my reflection when in government, thinking about this, is that it's quite a hard thing to do. And it takes time, and it requires an incredibly concerted effort from government working with businesses to make sure that they do value it. So whatever you do that is not a GCSE, you very quickly need to make sure has some currency, otherwise it won't end up benefiting people in the labour market. But I think supporting these young adults to get this foundational qualification is vital, because it has an enormous impact on their lifetime earnings. And that's why getting this bit right, as Bodil said, and again, you've heard, I think Sarah has given evidence from Get Further, which is a fantastic organisation that focuses on this area. It's a tricky thing to get right, but I think it's worthy of attention. And then that maybe, Lizzie can talk to you a little bit about, given that we believe this is really foundational important, how do you help people in their 20s and 30s and beyond who didn't pick it up the first time around, get that qualification?
And it's a different picture there, because they are coming back. The programmes that we've seen so far are people coming back to maths, maybe observing its effect on their employment and their broader life, which is great, because it speaks to that intrinsic motivation, recognition of numbers being important that we mentioned earlier. I think there we'd see a different set of potential opportunities to improve the space. So there are some great examples of up and down the country of programmes that provide to those sort of older adults, people whose age doesn't end in teen, but it varies, it's patchy, and so you might live in a postcode where the provision is fantastic, you might do less well. What we see is actually, I think, an opportunity to improve online delivery. So we've spoken to some fantastic online providers who are turning away applicants in their thousands, because the funding rules today mean that you need to be from the area where the physical college is, in order to enrol. We see that as quite a crucial missed opportunity. It also shows up, incidentally, in where the individual actually takes the exam. So studying online but doing an exam in person presents challenges with the distribution of funding locally versus nationally. So we think that's a very interesting prospect that people should consider. And then I think we should be thinking more broadly about how we can encourage more organisations to offer provision digitally where they are currently focused in colleges. I know you mentioned the financial literacy piece. I think it's related. But
well, we should probably get onto that separately. Yeah. But Baroness Bill, to your point on what can government do, this is one area where, and Fran, who's on our team, has done great work on this, again, we set ourselves an essay question of, we want to support adults later in life with gaining this foundational qualification that at least now is the best way for them to get the skills they need and signal to employers that they have them. How do we do that? Actually, an online delivery is the most cost-effective way to do it, but also means you can standardise the teaching and you can reach people at a time that is convenient for them, because adults are busy with their lives and they're not like school kids where you know where they are during the day and they're captive to you. So as we've tried to find a solution, we run up against these policy issues where we've devolved these adult education budgets, and the way that they are being deployed locally in areas is that the funding to take a step back, everyone's entitled, if they don't have a level 2 qualification, it's something that I changed in government, to get this level 2 qualification at any stage in their life, which is a good positive step. But the local authority likely is going to say you have to do it at a provider that is in our area, it has to be delivered in person. So then we've got this brilliant online provider that could do this nationally, very high quality standardized curriculum. Adults prefer to do these things online because it's flexible, but there are these funding and policy things that stop that from happening. So that's kind of one area that the committee can look at in its recommendations, because we certainly are going to spend more time and more of our financial resources to help adults who want to do this. We're likely to want to find a technology-enabled way to do it, but it will ultimately run up against some of these challenges down the line. And then maybe just to pick up on what Bodil said from a kind of policy change again, is this transition from school to college on the resits and sharing of information. You might want to tell the committee, because again, this is a kind of practical thing that the committee, I think, hopefully can put a bit of pressure on to help these children who don't get the GCSE, who are then off at college.
Yeah, so we heard from 16-year-olds who then went on to college, and let's say they are doing hair and beauty as their main course, but they are required to go to maths lessons, often against their will, because they got a 3 in their GCSEs at 16. What we saw is that if you are retaking English, you are likely to gradually, nudge up and improve a little bit every single time you take it. That's much less likely in maths. And you can kind of understand that, because if you're writing in your coursework every day for your health and social care or whatever course you're doing, you're not using those maths muscles in the same way, apart from in these maths lessons. So there's something, if we believe this piece of paper is really important, about making sure that we really seize the moment on that transition from school to college. A year 11 teacher can tell you backwards and forwards what the gaps are for each individual pupil. They can tell you they're in the bag, they're not in the bag. But that knowledge is lost then when they go to college. It's that the information flow doesn't pass through. Individual learners are entitled to the entirety of their script from the GCSE that they sat. And something as simple as telling students, you can request that and pass it on to your college and say, look, this is where I lost the marks. Then if they do take their GCSE in November that term, that's really not long, right? You've got September, October, November to really go from that 3 to the 4. They've got a much better chance of really bagging that qualification. So there's something about that transition from school to college, which is where many of these students who don't get a pass go, that I think we could that I think we can improve.
Improving those data flows between those institutions would really help the kids.
We're running rather tight on time.
Right.
So much to discuss, but we could be a little bit more succinct. Lord Hannett.
Thank you. I want to ask you about the role of employers specifically. My previous experience, just preamble to the specific question, was around lifelong learning in the workplace, where many large employers and employee representatives supported courses. But of course, these courses were specific interest to the individual. But we've heard from businesses about the role of some employers in providing training and support for their workplace in numeracy. But this is a very mixed picture. And we've also heard about falling investment in training. What do you see as the role of employers, if any, in addressing numeracy skills? And what is the incentive to do that?
Yes, it's an excellent question. And we think there is a role for employers with adults. The way when I talk to them and when I'm visiting businesses, the pitch to them would be that there's a couple of aspects to this. First, your employees are more likely to be able to do their job better and hopefully progress in your organisation if they have these skills. But also, there's a benefit to you from having a more financially literate, confident workforce. And most employers agree that actually, if their employees have got financial issues that they're grappling with, it distracts them from their work. They're ultimately going to be less focused, less engaged, less productive for you at work if there is financial anxiety elsewhere in their life. So given that, I think there's a strong incentive, or should be, for employers to do this. And many do it very well. And I remember visiting those businesses in government, and incredibly inspiring stories of actually people who had been working with companies starting as young children without any 16-year-olds without any qualifications, where the company had supported them over their career to move up, and actually that's brilliant for everybody. The other reason that we'd like employers to do it, and we're going to try and find ways to do this, and it speaks to what I said earlier, is it's quite hard to reach adults. So it's easy when we think about school children, 16 to 19, and even early years, it's difficult to coordinate, but we broadly know how to get at them. Adults are tricky, and actually, unless you're doing it through their employers, you're relying largely on them either doing an online course, which is certainly easier than physically showing up to their local education college. So actually, if more employers do this, you're more likely to be able to get to adults, because you should always meet people where they are, which is a good bit of advice we got when we were setting up, and lots of people who have been in this for longer than we have said that, and it is good advice, and workplaces in that sense are have a unique opportunity to engage with adults and then support them not in a self-interested way alone, but also more broadly for the individual.
Anybody else?
There's an interesting example in Scandinavia where quite often what you find is an entry-level employee doesn't necessarily require a maths qualification, but to progress, they might never be able to progress to the next stage to be a manager, supervisor, because they don't have one. So what this scheme does is they support the employer to send that employee off to get their qualification. They come back, they're promoted into a managerial position, and their entry-level role is then backfilled with someone who's unemployed. So it's win-win.
We're going to push on. Lady Shawcross.
Thank you. I should just declare for the record that I worked for Rishi Sunak in Downing Street and that I am now a trustee of the Richmond Project. You've mentioned your work with DFE on the financial literacy curriculum in schools. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the priorities in that area for both children and adults.
Perfect. Thank you, Lady Shawcross. Maybe I'll cover one particular aspect of it called the Big Three, and then maybe Lizzie can talk to you about our broader work with the Boston Consulting Group on financial literacy education in general, and then Bodil can pick up about how you deliver this in classrooms. So there's a professor at Stanford, Anna Maria Lusardi, who for over 2 decades has pioneered research into financial literacy education, and specifically come across what she terms the Big Three. And what she has concluded from all her work is that there are 3 straightforward questions that are the best way to gauge people's financial literacy, competence and understanding. 3 foundational concepts. One of those questions is around inflation, the other one is around compound interest, and the third is around risk diversification. And they've tested, her and her team have tested those questions rigorously across multiple countries over multiple years. For the first time in a similar way, we conducted that research here in the UK earlier this year. And the findings were in many ways a wake-up call, because 40% of adults could not answer the Big Three, which puts us below lots of peer countries like Germany, the United States, Canada, others. So there is work to do here. So when it comes to the curriculum and the work that we've been doing with DFE, we're keen to make sure that these concepts find their way into the financial literacy curriculum, because they've been proven, based with decades of evidence and research by brilliant academics, to be incredibly important to helping us understand. And we're thinking a little bit more broadly beyond that financial literacy curriculum for young people. We are thinking about how we can get a greater awareness of those Big Three in the adult population as well. But I'll maybe hand over to Lizzie to talk a little bit about the broader work that we're doing with DFE and Boston Consulting Group, and then Bodo will pick up the school delivery bit in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. We are... one of the reasons I think the Big Three is so compelling is because it is manageable. So we were struck when we released our financial literacy report by the resonance of 3 things. I mean, you see that in lots of other different areas. They are memorable and engaging, which I think is important, especially when we think about not only the children in the school, but their parents. and their own financial literacy. So the what really matters, and as Rishi said, we've been emphasising that in our discussions. They interplay with all sorts of concepts from borrowing through to planning for retirement. It's quite holistic despite being this manageable set of 3 things. But the how is also really important. So we were lucky enough to do a big piece of research with Boston Consulting Group, as Rishi mentioned, on best practice financial education programs globally. And their recommendations were really revealing. So in terms of the what, yes, I think being rooted in numeracy sounds a given, but it actually isn't. So it's important to say that out loud. Financial literacy should be explicitly connected to numeracy. But the how, so how it's actually put into place, is just as important in terms of getting people engaged. And that looks like a few specific things, most notably regular revisiting of topics in age-appropriate ways. So sequencing so that, for example, you might learn about the very basics of borrowing in Key Stage 1, but you would come back to interest as a percentage later on. But it's that building and repetitive nature that is really important. And then intuitively, I think, situating it in the child's real life context with as many opportunities to be as practical as possible. And so we have, just coming back to the work with the Department for Education, we've shared all of that knowledge with them in our interactions because I think that will be key to success. And Bodil can say a little bit about the testing in schools, which we'll also be doing for the department.
So when you tell teachers that you're going to be adding some extra things for them to teach and they're already busy schedules, it doesn't always go down well. And particularly this one, we actually did some polling and found that teachers' financial literacy was actually worse than the general public. So we've got a lot of work to do before we're entrusting this extra demand on them. So testing how that works in practice is something that we're going to be doing with schools, primary and secondary, over the coming year, and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Just on that, just put on record, our thanks and appreciation to the department, the Secretary of State and the Minister, who are very passionate about getting this right. And, we've really, actually, they're talking to lots of people, but, we feel very good about the engagement that we've had with the department, their willingness to take ideas from organisations like ours, and then where we can help them move things along quickly, test things, to get this right for the country. They've been very open and willing to do that, and I think they deserve credit for that. It's not always easy in government, as Ellen and I both know, to get things like that happening so quickly, but they are absolutely committed in doing that, and we're delighted to be able to play a small part in it.
If you're all happy, we will carry on just to get the last couple of questions in, if you're happy to stay a bit longer.
Yes, of course.
Lord Stansgate.
Well, my question was about early years education, so we've covered a lot of this already. I've had to wait all this time to ask what has already been asked and dealt with. So really, I don't want you to reopen all of that. But my colleague here mentioned earlier, intervened, and said, what about grandparents? Well, I'm a new grandparent, so I feel this very, very strongly. And I look very carefully at what could be done. So is there anything you can add as a result of the work you've done on the way in which grandparents have a role? Because people are living longer, there'll be greater opportunities for grandparents to play a part in the way that perhaps 50 or 100 years ago they couldn't or didn't. And also the family dynamics of helping, well, you said yourselves, parents can be unconfident about how to deal with numeracy with their own kids, and having their own parents intervene, could cause perhaps problems. So is there anything you want to add on the grandparental angle, please?
Congratulations, that's very exciting.
That's the most important thing to say.
A new life phase. But I think there are a few things. So interestingly, our research threw up that the people with much the strongest financial literacy were in general older. So even controlling for education, those above 55 who had left school at 16 were doing better than people in their 30s with a PhD. So
it's worth just saying, at that point, it's incredibly strong. I just make sure everyone got it. Just your point about how valuable grandparents can be.
Yeah.
It's so worth repeating, because I genuinely thought it was a mistake.
Yes, Please do repeat. It is true. So I'll say it again. The one key sort of area of wisdom is in financial literacy, and our research has shown up that the older age groups, even those who left school at 16, will outperform someone younger with a much more sort of postgraduate degree level educated person. So make what you will of that challenge for us nationally. Clearly, those generations have something very specific to offer there. Beyond that, I would say a few things. One is, if you hear negative discussion about numbers. You won't need this, darling, because I didn't. I always hated maths too. You're not on your own. You can, at your own risk, as you say, but gently intervene. I think that the conversational piece is very important. And then we've actually had this question before, because we did a piece for Good Housekeeping, which has both mothers and grandmothers, and some fathers and grandfathers in amongst its readership. And they were raising this exact question, and we were delighted that they asked for practical tips. So I'll share some with you now. So it might be about observing shapes. Rishi's favourite is the triangle slice of pizza versus the square box, but those sorts of things. If you
rectangle napkin.
A rectangle napkin.
And the circle plate.
We could go on.
Yep.
But I think if you're sort of taking a trip out for a pizza or anything like that, observing shapes is really nice. There are also lovely number games, like making a pattern with your grandchild and asking them to continue it, or doing it wrong on purpose and having them correct it. You can measure everyday items around your house, largest to smallest. So it's really about, when you're playing with them anyway, thinking, how can I make this a number-themed game?
Very good.
Thanks, I'll remember that next time I take them to the Express.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
Lady Hanway.
Thank you. I want to ask you about technology. Before I do, though it's related to this, can I just pursue shapes, spatial issues, and whether and how much that figures in education for adults? Because earlier this week, I was told that if you want to pass your driving test, you are tested now on whether you can use sat-nav. Now, to me, sat-nav does not replace maps. Does this come into your thinking?
The spatial reasoning research is really interesting and quite counterintuitive. It's not just that if you've done lots of spatial reasoning in your early childhood, you can do geometry questions better. You can do arithmetic questions better. And it's something to do with you being able to visualize a number line and what's going on. There's something that happens in your brain if you've got that. With adults, I think I haven't personally seen the evidence that you can intervene and magically transform someone's ability to do maps in their head. I certainly struggle with that, but there's something there, definitely. I think that's all I've said on that.
Right, thank you. Well, the real question is what the role of numeracy will be, how it will change as technology advances. What are the challenges here? Will numeracy remain important? Will there be a mindset which is, I don't need to be able to do that because the machine will do that?
Big question.
My
quick response. I'm obviously a passionate believer that AI in particular is going to transform every aspect of our economy, our society, our lives. And if we get it right, for the better. And we have to prepare young people for that world and to be able to use those tools. But in my mind, absolutely no change to the importance that we should place on them having foundational numeracy. I mean, when I was in government, I thought people should study more numeracy all the way to 18. I absolutely still believe that today. And I think the best way to prepare young people for this world, on top of making sure that they can use these new tools, is for them to have a breadth of understanding and knowledge, because ultimately the human judgment is going to get more and more important, and we have to make sure that we understand there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom, or knowledge and judgment. And these machines are going to be great at having lots of knowledge, but the ability to critique that, to judge the output of it, to know actually what the right question to ask, to sense check, those will remain critical human skills. And if you haven't had the cognitive education, I think all the way up to 18 in numerical concepts, I don't think actually that you will be well placed to thrive in that world if you're overly reliant on the machine without that ability. So that would be my quick answer on that.
Thank you. Well,
Lady Alexander, would you like to take our last question and weave any of your own thoughts in with it?
Oh yes, I will take the last question. This is a particularly exciting one to ask of a former Prime Minister, but we will happily have everybody else comment as well too if they so wish. The question, we've asked this to everyone, as you will be well aware, the challenge is what do we ask of government, because fundamentally that's the report. So we will make recommendations to different stakeholders. But the question is this: if there was one recommendation that you would like to see the committee make to government in its final report, what would that be?
Well, I think we'll all have a go, Alexander, and look, and hopefully as we've been going through, I think we've been trying to give you a sense of some specific micro policy areas that I think are worthy of your attention and time to recommend to the government. We organise our work in three buckets: family, foundations, and financial. And maybe I will speak to the family aspect of it, which many of you have asked about. And it seems to me that a recommendation, certainly our recommendation, is that we've got to focus on the intergenerational and the cultural aspects of this. And part of dealing with the cultural issue around numbers and the lack of confidence and anxiety people have around it is by tackling this intergenerational issue. We were just talking about grandparents, but it's so clear that link between parents and grandparents and little children is absolutely critical. And look, I'm not going to pretend it's an easy thing for government to get at, but it's probably the kind of thing that government is not well set up to think even about in the first place. But on this, we should be thinking about it, is how do we break that intergenerational link? And if we don't, we're going to be here in years to come still talking about the fact that people don't think that they're numbers people, or they're scared about maths. And we really want to break that cycle and have everyone feel confident around numbers, because it's going to unlock greater opportunities for them, better control in their lives, and ultimately transform their life for the better. But that requires us to think about breaking this intergenerational loop. And we've talked about lots of different ways you can do that, but I think the macro observation is thinking about that in the first place. So that would be my quick thing. And then, Lizzie, do you want to pick one of the others?
I think thinking about the financial literacy piece, as I say, the genius of the big three is how simple they are. And so I would say focus on that, which it's great that we're having the conversation about school children, but also thinking about adults. It is an incredibly measurable way to track progress. So I would say, as far as we can adopt the big three as the yardstick for progress, come back to it. Our research found 4 in 10 people have this poor or very poor financial literacy, i.e. can only answer one or possibly none of those questions. It's very easy to track that and see, hopefully, that number coming down with time.
Thank you.
And in terms of schools and foundations, really making sure we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater with any new qualifications and ideas. There's not much point in having a new qualification if it's not valued in the big wide world. And you can't just make a new qualification and demand it be so. That's not how it works. There are real opportunities, I think, to introduce some checks, like the times table check that has been introduced in Year 4. So I'd encourage the government to think about whether there are 1 or 2 points in a school child's journey where we could add some other foundational concepts there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry we've overrun, but I think you had very important contributions to make, and so we will bear all of those in mind. So thank you very much indeed, and we're nearly at the end of our evidence session, so but if you have any further thoughts that you'd like to send through to us, then we'd be very keen to hear from them.
Well, Chair, thank you so much again for inviting us and for the good, thorough conversation we've had. I think there is a lot of alignment in your work and how we see the world, and we'd be delighted to follow up. And likewise, the offer is there if you have any follow-up questions or thoughts provoked by this that we can add a little bit more information or shed some light on, we'd be delighted, and the team would be delighted to do that. But again, thank you for today, but more importantly, thank you for your attention and focus on this matter. It will really raise the awareness and give it real weight, for which we are all very grateful.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome to this evidence session of Numeracy for Life. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will get cracking on the questions. So I'm just going to sort of set the scene with the first one, which is really about the cultural issues that surround numeracy and that we somehow treat it differently to literacy. And I'm interested to know if you are doing anything to help with that, or any suggestions that you think we should be considering.
Kick off. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for having us here today. I'm Sam Timms. I'm the Chief Executive of the charity National Numeracy, and I've had the privilege and pleasure to meet you previously as well. So, thinking about those specific areas around the culture, and then what we are doing to address that. I think to start around culture, maths anxiety, confidence, these things are closely related. When it comes to lack of confidence that informs this around numbers and maths, we know this is widely experienced. This is a critical national issue experienced at some scale. It affects overall, in general, women more than men when it comes to confidence with numbers and maths anxiety. And we know that this holds people back. We also know it's changeable. We know it's very changeable, and I can set out some ways in which we go about changing that. When it comes to culture, though, we know that particularly younger adults, under 34s, for example, will avoid situations, in large numbers, will avoid situations which involve numbers and maths. We have good data on this. We also know that particularly, again, all adults, but younger adults even more so, will, as much as half, will avoid applying for a job, for example, or a qualification, taking a qualification, if they know that numbers or maths is involved or mentioned or part of the process. So this sort of culture around feeling a lack of confidence is really holding many people back. About 32% of adults from our research say they feel anxious when put in situations that they have to use numbers. Culturally, though, not that many adults with low numeracy say they want to improve their numeracy. And that's, I think, very, very interesting. They either don't see necessarily the need to do that or see how it would benefit them. And I think the second of those is absolutely key to how we start changing this culture. There's a separation between what we actually think numeracy or maths is, what it meant to us when we were young at school, and actually what it could mean to us, the value that we might gain from it in our lives. And I think that's critical to changing culture. Less than half of all adults say that they would feel embarrassed to say that they can't do maths, that they were no good with numbers and maths. And that compares to 65% when it comes to reading and writing. So there is this big separation in culture as well around numbers and maths as compared to reading and writing that we need to address. So we know it's a huge issue. We have really important clues about how to address it. The place I would start is this intergenerational nature of both number confidence and numeracy skills that we see come through time and time again. And it's a big way in which National Numeracy works to address low numeracy right across the UK, on the ground, in all 4 nations. So what we do is work to empower communities, whether those are school communities, local communities, employers, working with local partners who are best placed to meet people where they are to start to bring about change. So rather than introducing somewhere else people need to go and work in a different way with different people, we make sure that we actually equip people locally who are already working with people to be able to bring about that change. Crucially, around culture, we need to focus much more on motivations and outcomes. So why should we be numerate? Why should we invest in this? I think we have too much focus on seeing numeracy as the outcome. I would say numeracy is not the outcome when we want to motivate people who might struggle to improve. The outcome needs to be something else. It needs to be how that will help you get into work or get on at work, improve how you manage your money or feel more comfortable with it, or how you support your children. That needs to be much more about, that's the reason we're doing it, not for the sake of being good with numbers. I think that's crucially powerful in how we work with communities. We need to remove the barriers, bite-sized learning, informal approaches to get people started. Most people that struggle are not ready to engage with a significant maths course, for example. They're in no place ready to do that for a wide range of reasons. So we need to give people a way to start, to reach them and to make a start. And as we see in so many other areas, that will then lead to greater and deeper engagement. I'll stop there.
I think we're going to move on because we've only really got about 3 or 4 minutes for each question. So I'm going to turn to Lord Stansgate.
Good morning and well, good afternoon now, and thank you. I wanted to ask about the Multiply programme. We have been given the results of the evaluation. In fact, I had to order an extra ream of paper when I press print, and it's full of a great deal of information. But what I wanted to ask is that it doesn't seem as though it demonstrates exact evidence of participants' numeracy skills have been actually improved. And unless you tell me that that's unfair, and I just wondered what your reflections really were and are on the Multiply programme, and anything you'd like to say in the light of it.
Yeah, I can. Do you want me to do that? So first, I would say there is evidence around improvement in confidence, and our research shows that improving number confidence is the strongest predictor of a subsequent improvement in skills. So I think there is an inference there, but that's absolutely crucial. We know that 33%, a third of learners on Multiply went on to pursue a further course. That's a good evidence of progression. We know as well that that 81% of learners with parental responsibilities said that the programme had improved their confidence in helping their children with their homework and talking about maths. Now that's a very specific, I think, strong outcome. Multiply provided, I think, in many ways the missing link. Before, if you want to do a maths course, you had, and you know what the evidence shows us is not many people do, and in declining numbers over the last decade, significantly declining numbers over the past decade, for understandable reasons. People don't do that in high numbers. With Multiply, it was all about, look, if you want to help the kids that are in your care, you want to get on at work, you want to build a career, you want to make a start, you want something to add value, and then go on from there. That's what it provided, which wasn't, and now again isn't, actually available in any other way to people. It allowed local communities to reach those hardest to reach people and to get them started. And I think that is an incredibly powerful outcome. And I know this because both in terms of the development of the sort of policy, but also in the delivery of this, national numeracy was heavily involved, and we've seen those results ourselves.
Okay. Well, thank you. In the light of the time, I better.
Yes. Well, maybe one of you would like to come in on that.
I'm not an expert on Multiply, but I would like to just say about 1 or 2 things that are happening out in the wider mathematics space, which is supporting the publicity, if you like, about mathematics and numeracy. So one of the charities of which I'm a trustee is called Maths World UK, and we have a Maths Exploratorium in London, and we have another one in Leeds. And Leeds, we have been funded to have a 2-year City of Maths in Leeds. So there are all sorts of activities going on. For example, Asda is working with us. One of the challenges is how many litres of milk do you think were sold last week? So these are all about things that are accessible. You don't need to be able to do calculations to do all of these things, but estimation is a really important thing. You have had information from the Maths Futures project, I know, last week from Professor Jane Clark. So Maths Futures talks about general literacy, literacy in mathematics. That's not the same as arithmetic. Arithmetic is the precursor to doing the mathematics that you need for numeracy. The Academy of Mathematical Sciences has looked at the contribution of the mathematical sciences to the budget of the country, and has done a very extensive read on the Deloitte's report. So all of these things are out in the public domain and are being publicised as much as we can in order to show the importance of mathematics. Mathematics is not numeracy, and numeracy is not mathematics, but obviously they're very closely aligned.
Thank you. Lady Bull.
Thank you. Just to follow up on the question about Multiply and adult education, I think what we've heard as a committee is there are a multitude of initiatives, programs, projects, funding pots. I mean, there's a list as long as your arm. It's quite confusing for people. And the issue of devolved budgets, which I don't know whether you heard the last session, but Mr. Sunak said, having a national strategy in the light of devolved budgets becomes quite challenging. So the question is really about what needs to happen, what changes need to happen, so that we have a sustained, accessible, comprehensive adult education offer, learning from Multiply, but moving forward. What needs to happen? Because we clearly don't have that, but we have a massive problem, as you've clearly set out with adult numeracy. So what changes need to happen? And I don't know who wants to take that first.
Can we go on that?
Well, thank you. Where I would start is by saying that we don't really have a supply issue, and we have when it comes to provision. So I think we've incorrectly diagnosed the issue as let's put on more courses, let's give more people more things to do successively over decades, because we've identified if we just provided more and we made it free and free to a higher level, more people would do it. The problem is it's not a supply issue when we're talking about adult learners. It's a demand issue primarily. So we have to recognise that. And to come back to Multiply, it was the first initiative that did recognise that in the adult funding space, that said, well, how do we boost demand here? How do we get people started? How do we provide flexibility, allow local authorities, local providers to work with different types of organisation and be nimble, and get people started experiencing something in a different way than they've ever experienced it before? This is absolutely key. Boosting demand by starting with how are we going to get more people engaged, started, experiencing success, having previously typically experienced a great deal of failure, and say, I am a maths person, or I can do this, that I know now that I can improve. And we see that with Multiply, not just the impact on adult numeracy levels or course going on to take further courses, but also learning in other areas. We know that when we support people, adults, to improve their numeracy, not only are they more likely to go on further, but they're more likely, our research shows, to learn in other areas of their life as well, because it's a barrier they've removed. So the key to addressing this, beyond all the things that are currently being done, many of them fantastic, is to focus much more on boosting demand by giving that flexibility locally.
And I really want to bring you in, but just before, so I think what you might be saying is it's a bit unfair to assess Multiply on the basis of something it wasn't set up to do, and what it was set up to do, which was to stimulate demand, meet people where they are. It had some success.
Yeah, I think yes. If we focus on just looking primarily at a sort of achievement or attainment, it misses the fact that if people aren't doing it, there is no attainment.
Exactly. Please, I would love to hear from you. Thank you, Martina.
Yeah, I would just like to echo what Lynn and Sam have said, which is that if we are assessing numeracy, that we make confidence at the heart of that. That's something that we tried to do at National Numeracy through a few initiatives. So through our National Numeracy Challenge, we let people take the challenge. They can use a calculator, they can use tools, and it's the only online tool that measures how you feel about maths as well as the numeracy aspect. National Numeracy Day, an awareness day, which gets bigger and bigger every year, incorporates things that people would do anyway. So activities, we did a school assembly last year with some year 3s, year 6s, dance classes, online conversations around maths help to normalize it. And the final thing that I'd say is the role of social media content as well. So I'm a financial educator. I create content on the likes of Instagram and TikTok. And if you go on either of those platforms and just type in the word maths, you'll see many engaging, interesting maths content creators who help to normalize the topic for people every day.
Do we know anything about the age demographic of people who lean towards social media for their education, let's not call it education, further development of numeracy skills? Do we know about the age demographic?
Generally speaking, TikTok tends to skew younger. It's Gen Z, under the age of 25 is a video first platform. Instagram tends to skew kind of millennial, kind of my age group, and then the likes of Facebook will tend to skew to slightly older audiences.
You can really target.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lord Hannett.
Thank you. I want to ask you about the role of employers, and you have a particular opinion on this. I mean, we know that many employers take staff on who may not have good numeracy skills, and then that raises the question of progression in the workplace, etc. What role do you think employers have in identifying and particularly improving low numeracy in their workforce? And what might be what could the government do to support and encourage this work?
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity with employers. We have tens of millions of payrolled employees in the country, and they'll spend much of their time at work. A few things that we could perhaps look at is perhaps accreditations for numeracy-friendly employers, either ones that provide training or integrate numeracy into the ways that they work. The more numerate members of staff in teams and workforces could perhaps nominate themselves as numeracy champions to support their fellow employees. And we could also invest more into, because as a financial educator, I've gone into workplaces and delivered financial literacy workshops, but why not numeracy workshops as a pillar of employee well-being as well?
Yeah, and what I'd add is just that employers should care about this issue, because it will benefit them to care about it. It can help create a more productive workforce, the evidence shows, a more agile workforce as well, very, very importantly. We know that low numeracy has a significant impact around careers in terms of earnings, progression, for example, job hunting, job performance. So government and employers should really take note. It's important also to say that we do have the National Numeracy Leadership Council, which is a group primarily made up of large employers in the country and businesses that do care about this issue. They have already done things like set up an employee task force to address the gender number confidence gap between women and men in terms of numeracy levels, around confidence in particular, and how that can be addressed in workplaces, for example, and have created with National Numeracy the Numeracy for Equality Employer Pledge. So what I would say is lots of employers are already doing great work in this area, have already recognised that it needs much further attention and are taking action. Some of the biggest employers in the country working with National Numeracy, but there's a lot further we can go as Rotimi set out.
Thank you. Lady Bull.
Oh, apologies.
Well, we'll come back if we have time on
Perfect.
that one.
So we've heard a lot of evidence about maths education. We've heard people quote the improvements in the PISA figures, etc. But as you will well know, those improvements are happening amongst the higher achievers, and we are leaving people behind. We heard from Brian Butterworth that if you could raise the standards of the lowest 11%, there'd be a 0.44% increase in GDP. I don't know whether that's so or not, but I don't have any reason to doubt him. So my question is about the low achievers, the ones who are getting left behind. What do we need to do to help them? And do you have any confidence in the driving license style course that is being developed that could be a way of accruing learning and tracking it on your sort of passport style way?
So I would totally agree with previous speakers that the starting point has to be in early years. And it's good to see the government is putting in a lot of money at the moment into early years, which is good. I think things that could be improved in early years, because we know that what happens in early years has a really significant knock-on effect into the future, is to ensure that those people who are early years practitioners are really expert not only in literacy and the start of literacy, but also in numeracy. And it was a little time ago when the need for numeracy, for nursery nurses to have a GCSE maths was removed. So there is a lack of expertise in that very early area. In terms of what happens when students go into Key Stage 1 and into Key Stage 2, I have the privilege of chairing the DFE drafting group, and we've been looking very carefully at the amount of content there is in Key Stage 1, because there's quite a lot to do in just those 2 years. You have to take in quite a lot of very basic and very important mathematical ideas. And so with direction from the CAR and from the DFE, we're trying to space out that content so that Key Stage 1 is much more about using a smaller amount of knowledge, but in a much more sophisticated way, so that they really have a deep understanding. And then that obviously has a knock-on to Key Stage 2, because if in Key Stage 1 you're secure, when you start Key Stage 2, you're starting from a good place, instead of having to try and do retrograde work. 40% of Key Stage 2 children do not achieve the expected standard. 40%, so not far off, half the children leaving primary school do not achieve what the government has said is an expected standard. So one of the things that we're hoping is by spacing out, giving more time for problem solving and reasoning, which is the purpose of doing mathematics anyway, but actually we'll get to the point where we've got a much higher percentage of students reaching that accepted standard. And in terms of the curriculum in Key Stage 3, one of the things we know about financial literacy is that the mathematics underpinning it is mostly about proportional reasoning. So Key Stage 1 children talk about additive reasoning. By the time they get into Key Stage 2, they're talking about multiplicative reasoning. And then by the time they get into Key Stage 3, they're talking about proportional reasoning. And proportional reasoning is all about ratios and percentages, all of those sorts of things, which are the absolute groundings for a lot of financial literacy. And so in the curriculum we are trying. It's a shame that the curriculum is about evolution, not revolution, because we'd have loved to have done some revolutionary things, but we haven't been allowed to do that. We've had to stick within the parameters. But we are trying to make sure that these things are consistent and coherent. And in terms of the work that Rishi Sunak and his colleagues have been doing with citizenship, we've made sure that the mathematics that is needed in citizenship for financial literacy is taught in mathematics first before they meet it in other subjects. Similarly, the mathematics that they need in science or in geography or in computer science, they meet first in mathematics before they then meet it in other subjects. And you might think that that's been so forever, but that is revolutionary.
That's great. Can I just, that's really helpful, thank you. I'm just going to come back to the low achievers, yep. and I think, as Sam knows, I'm patron of the Dyscalculia Network, so I'm very interested in people with maths learning difficulties too. What more needs to be done to support those children who are being left behind, and as you've already said, are not getting the foundations, and so the house on which they're trying to build is not solid?
When I cast my mind back to when I was at school, I loved maths as a primary school pupil. I fell out of love with it during secondary school and then during university, and then now in my job I use maths every day and I love it again. What caused that rift to happen in my secondary school education was streaming. So the dividing of pupils into different sets by achievement. There was a sense between me and my classmates that we were taken less seriously as pupils because we were in the lower set, and then even within the lowest set, the most confident children would sit towards the front of the classroom, and then you'd have the people who felt they weren't maths people towards the back of the classroom. And so I can appreciate that there are probably advantages in terms of maybe for the teachers teaching people of similar attainment levels, and there's probably advantages for the children as well. But I just wonder if by separating people by ability level in maths, which is not something we do with English, for example, we add to the rift that you're asking about, and whether there are opportunities for cross-pollination between the more confident students and the less confident students in mixed ability sets.
Yeah, I think that you put your finger absolutely on the nub of the problem. It is, yeah. Do you have a view on this?
Well, one of the things about Key Stage 3 is that students come up from primary school into Key Stage 3, and we know that they get turned off at the beginning of Key Stage 3 because they haven't been very secure at Key Stage 2. So the year 7 is all a repetition, and we know that students' liking for maths does a deep dive. And if they are low socioeconomic kids with a low socioeconomic background, they are unlikely then to ever pick up maths again. Whereas those who've got a background of parental support will probably stick with it. If they stick with it, then they're just as likely to take a GCSE and get a high grade. They're just as likely to do A-level maths. They're just as likely to do a maths degree. But that year 7 is a really pivotal year. And I know David Thomas was here, who's also on the drafting team for the DFE, and Axiom Maths is doing some great work looking at trying to keep low socioeconomic students in the maths world, rather than us losing them.
Thank you. Lord Blackwell.
Thank you. Staying on the topic of maths teaching, how important do you think it is, or how helpful is it, to use real-life context in trying to get children interested in learning? And a number of our witnesses have said how helpful they think this could be, but presumably there are some aspects of numeracy, multiplication tables, for example, which you just have to learn in an abstract sense.
It is not easy to apply mathematics. So mathematics and numeracy are muddled up together in order to be able to solve an everyday problem. So say you're trying to work out how much wallpaper you need for this amazing room. What sort of measurements do you need to take? And what sort of calculations are you going to have to do in order to amalgamate all the different bits of the room? And when you've done that, how do you translate that into the dimensions of ordinary wallpaper? This is a complicated thing to do. So when we're talking about applying maths, you have to be really careful about what applications you do, because if the application is too far away from the mathematics that you're doing, then actually it just puts children off. So you need to choose your applications which are very close to the content that you've been doing. It's a great idea, and everybody says, oh yeah, the thing that we're missing in the maths curriculum is real life calculations. Well, there's a reason for that, and it's because they're really, really difficult. Doesn't mean to say we shouldn't do it, but they have their place, and you need to choose where the place is quite carefully.
And I would just add, just on picking up at the end of Lynn's points there, it is worth it, because if it's done well, it can be that difference between seeing maths as something abstract, maths for the sake of maths, which has tremendous value in itself, but for people that for lots of people, it's about how they're going to use it, and allowing people to see the connections between what they're learning and how it's going to benefit them, I think, does an awful lot of good, which is why it's worth doing this. At National Numeracy, we'd never use any mathematical notation that's not contextualised. It's the approach we take, particularly focused on people with lower levels of numeracy, because we've seen time and time again through our research that is what helps people break the connections which they've had, which is this is something that I learnt at school, the reward for which was not having to do it again, to something that, hang on a minute, so, this is something that can help me. I'm using this all the time. The number of, the examples that we have of where we ask people en masse, do you use maths in your daily life? And the vast majority of people will consistently say, no, I don't. And then we will say, well, tell us what job you do. And then we start to go through some examples. And suddenly, yes, I'm using maths, not just every day, probably every hour. So there's this disconnect, and contextualizing numbers and maths really helps make those connections towards value. And value is a big part of the proposition that gets people to engage and invest in something, because it benefits, they can see the benefit to them. So it's hard, but absolutely worth it, I think.
Very good, thank you. Lord Hampton.
Thank you. We keep on coming back to this again and again. People tell us that they want an alternative qualification that's more functional. I mean, we have it. Why do you think is it a case that it just needs to be advertised more, or does it need to be changed, the functional skill qualification?
I would say functional skills is not functional.
Right.
Yes, I would say it needs to be changed. I think one of the issues about it, and Becky Francis, who chaired the CAR, talks about having a level 1 after GCSE, because if you put it before GCSE, you are automatically assuming that some students are going to do this, and that dividing students out is seen to be not a fair thing to do. I think we should have a numeracy passport, and I think everybody should do it, because you can have students who get a grade 8 at GCSE, and so they're very good at all the stuff that they've practiced, but actually if you ask them to solve some really good problems on a real life problem, they would find that much more difficult. And so I think the issue with having a different qualification is that it has been seen to be of lesser value because it's only for those who can only do that stuff. Whereas if everybody had to do it, like a driving test, I mean, we don't identify people who are already, physically very adept and say, well, you only need to do this in your driving test, you don't need to do this. I think there's a lot of merit in that, and it would be a brilliant stepping stone to GCSE, rather than doing something when you've failed it after 11 years worth of maths.
And there was a lot of nodding coming from Rotimi there. Do you?
Yeah, just picking up on some of the points that have been made. I have had success imparting mathematical principles by making, and I think it's already been said, by making the outcomes rewarding. And so if I speak about mathematical concepts in theory, I tend not to engage people, but if I then apply it to here's how to get a pay rise, then you can introduce percentage change. Here's how to save up money, here's how to budget, particularly with the cost of living challenges going on. I take things that people already want or are already doing, and then I put the maths lesson into that, and I've had a lot of success with that as an educator.
Thank you, Sean.
Do you want to move on to post-16?
So, which leads us quite nicely on to post-16, and obviously we've just had Rishi Sunak in, great ambassador for that. I mean, and that seems to be a way to get the building on the more real world stuff. I mean, how do you see that going? Why hasn't it got more traction?
Well, core maths is a fantastic qualification, but we don't have enough maths teachers. So if a school's going to have maths post-16, they're going to put it into A-level and they're going to put it into further maths. One of the things that has been tried is retraining teachers of other subjects to teach core maths with quite a lot of success. But its acceptability by the universities is not universal. And so and that's a key thing, isn't it? What are students going to do post-16 if they know it doesn't have any value for the university that they want to go to? So I think those two things are really the barriers. But they're fantastic qualifications, and the students who do them really enjoy it because it is about applications and a lot of data science as well, which they don't get that much of in GCSE.
I agree. This currency issue, I think, is one of the key drivers, and it's both that there is progress being made, but still a lot more to come in terms of universities recognising core maths in that way, but also employers as well. That's something that I think needs to change if we are to improve the take up of provision of core maths. It's employers seeing that as something and recognising that as something that's valuable. That could also shift the dial, I think.
Right, Timmy, would you have done a later maths qualification at school if it had been an option?
Would I have done the qualification later on in school or just later on in life?
No, in school. If you the post 16, if it had been.
Yeah, absolutely. When I feel quite sad about what happened with me because it was almost like, as Lynn's touched upon year 7 being that pivotal point. I got moved down into a lower set, and then it's like you get taught things, and then if you miss a level, then you're locked behind that for the rest of your time at school. And so by the time I got to year 11, I was really, really strong in the humanities and hadn't done maths for like 5 years, basically, properly. So I'm just very thankful and very lucky that at my first job, I worked for a manager who loved maths. Maths was part of my role as a researcher at a PR company, and then I was able to then use it again every day, but not everyone will get that opportunity.
Right, brilliant, thank you.
Thank you. Lady Hanley.
Thank you. We ended the last session with some questions about technology.
Oh, yeah.
And I must say my own experience is I may use a calculator, but I still want to retain the question in my head, does this look a sensible outcome? So I wondered if you'd like to say anything more about that and about how numeracy policy should adapt to reflect the way the world is changing.
We probably all have something to maybe add
please.
on that. Certainly from the perspective of national numeracy, very much in favour of the use of technology, but absolutely in the example you gave is a perfect example, which is it should accompany having those fundamental numeracy skills and confidence in place. It should be used in conjunction so that you know, firstly, that what you are putting in is the right kind of query, and then secondly, to be able to know what you're getting out is likely to be accurate. It sounds about right. Because I think the risk with all kinds of technology when we rely on it entirely is not just that we make those mistakes because we trust it too much, but there is a risk, therefore, that we stop worrying about putting those foundations in place at all. And then I think we have a much bigger problem as a society as well. We are, alongside a research organisation, Policy Connect, and KPMG and businesses of the National Numeracy Leadership Council that I mentioned earlier, have undertaken some research on AI, numeracy and social mobility, and this is due to be published in less than 2 weeks actually. So we'll have a lot more to share around those interdependencies very, very shortly. But what I would say is numeracy is absolutely critical essential to have that, to be able to critically engage with information, particularly when we're using technology. It's not really sufficiently recognised or understood. We know that actually, many people, a significant proportion of people don't necessarily see that yet in the same way as they don't see that they're using numbers in their daily lives. So when it comes to things like checking accuracy, using estimation, consistency, understanding probability, likelihood, these are all things that we absolutely have to have in place in order to get the most from technology and to avoid making mistakes is, I think, overall I would say.
To bring in social media as well, I think it would be a good idea to seek out, engage with and partner with people who are doing great work with maths content online already, and finance content to a certain degree. Because they show up online every day, they have audiences, they're trusted, they're able to make maths interesting, fun, and they have enormous reach. in some cases millions and millions of people all over the country. And so utilising technology in that way to reach more people, I think is going to be really important. I heard a few of Mr. Sunak's remarks in the previous session, and yeah, I just think AI is changing the world very rapidly, has done in the last 5 years and will continue to do so. I think we're going to have to teach AI skills in the same way we teach IT skills and numeracy skills going forwards. I think we should empower young people to use AI tools when calculating. I do. I will put calculations into AI tools when I'm doing my work. But as Sam has said, not forget to teach the foundational things, so that, because AI quite happily hallucinates from time to time, so you want to understand that what you're getting back is actually the correct answer.
Or it's quite easy to put in point something instead of, because your finger just strays instead of the bigger number. Yeah.
Great. Well, just to sum up, our last question is for you to offer your one killer solution to our numeracy challenges. So if you want us to put one thing into our report as a recommendation, what would it be?
Each or together?
Well, if you've each got different ones, then you can all bid, but be brief, please.
I would really like a numeracy qualification. A numeracy qualification that everybody takes, like a driving test. And incidentally, I think there should be a literacy and a digital skills one that go alongside it, a sort of a passport that you do in secondary school.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate the final point I made, that the idea of having nationwide either numeracy ambassadors or influencers, I think is quite exciting, because Google actually released some data a few years ago. They found that for people under the age of 25, they were losing significant amounts of traffic on their search engine to the likes of Instagram and TikTok, because young people keyword search on the social media platforms more than they do on the search engines. And so a great way to engage people earlier on in their life is by partnering with the people that they follow online and trust.
Final word to you, Sam.
Yeah, I would say, look, you started the session talking about culture and how do we shift that culture, and we need to change how people see, feel and understand the value of numeracy in their everyday lives. This is going to take a massive effort across every sector of society, needs to be part of this if we're to change that culture and improve that culture. So it's why we collaborated with Barclays recently in their recent report, looking at some of this culture and attitudes and confidence, and together we've been calling for a year of numeracy. It's currently the year of reading. We're seeing so many organisations really working together to make change happen. We could do that with numeracy as well. So we're both calling for this, but we're going to go beyond this, and we're going to build a coalition of organisations, of willing organisations and people that want to make this happen. And I think that government should and could play an absolutely critical role in making this very successful.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this session. I'm most grateful to you all. And if you do have further thoughts, do write in, particularly perhaps that policy paper you're about to publish. But we are starting on our heads of report from now on. So if you have any more ideas that you'd like us to think about, if you could get them in quickly, that would be great. Because you are very important advocates in this area. So thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting us.